Hello, one. Hello, all. Welcome to the long-awaited debut of the Limit Breakers podcast. Rather than bore you with all the details right now, I'm excited about this. I hope you're excited about it. Let's just get right into it. Welcome, guys. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm incredibly excited to get this thing started. We are the Limit Breakers again. My name is Cameron. I'm joined with two good buddies of mine and co-hosts. Their names are...
Justin.
Steven.
I've been a podcast fan for quite some time myself. I'm also a gaming fan, and I thought, if other people can do it, why can't I? I started thinking about making a gaming podcast. I realized it'd kind of be boring as hell if it were just me talking, so found some good buddies of mine who I've gamed with since I was pretty young and said, you guys interested whatsoever in doing a podcast with me?
And I really couldn't be more excited about it, honestly.
And I couldn't think of anything I hated to do more, but I agreed anyway.
That is actually true, so if you sense any type of hostility in his voice going forward, you'll know that it's 100% genuine. On a serious note, we have been gaming together for going on 20 years at this point. And when I was thinking about making this podcast, at first I was thinking, I've been playing a lot of games lately. Would it be kind of fun to do just sort of a game review type thing? And then I thought, almost all my favorite gaming memories from my life have all been, cooperative things with good buddies of mine. And wouldn't that perspective and wouldn't those stories kind of make for a good extra layer to this podcast you're thinking about doing? The answer was yes. So I mentioned it to Steven and Justin. And as we kind of got down talking about this whole thing, a couple of the stories that popped up over the course of that conversation really made me feel better about doing this podcast, and were just funny as hell. So to give you an example of the kind of things that we grew up doing together, the first one that came to mind for me was meeting these guys really young. We started gaming, and this might be foreign to some of you younger folk out there, but we started gaming before the internet was even really in every household. So we were gaming back in the point when, Steven was literally printing off white and green, like the paper with like the holes in the sides, strategy guides from the internet while we all sat around and played an old tube TV trying to beat RPGs back in the day. So, I don't know if any stories come to mind for you guys, but we've been gaming since those days.
Yeah, I mean, an enormous amount of stories come to mind. Frankly, one thing I think I love about games, Cam, is just that when you do play games cooperatively with other people, how characters in games start to become an extension of just each other's personalities and really hilarious, exaggerated ways. And just for example, I remember one of our first raids together in EverQuest when you had meticulously planned this Seleucid A raid, and all of us show up and we're ready to go, and halfway through the raid you were actually the one to fall in lava and burn to death, and after like a ordeal of like a half hour trying to get you out, we actually just had to resign you to die, which was rather despairing. But and you, Justin, I still remember when in EverQuest we were at high keep leveling, and just at the spur of the moment we all decided that we actually just wanted to trap you in the bank by just surrounding you with our characters, some of them being ogres, which didn't allow a single possible inch of room for you to escape. But I think just many of my memories in games are as real as my memories in real life, precisely because people's personalities enter into the game in such unique ways.
So if you want to know my role in the podcast going forward, I'm going to be the raid leader / lava eater. I think that's pretty fitting. Justin, anything come to mind for you?
Well, as Steven mentioned, I was tortured very much in game. Needless to say, that extended out of game into our real life RPGs that we actually concocted, where Cam would actually sit there and write storylines for us, create stat sheets with like HP and spells and those kinds of things. And I would be having to sit there, and I would always wind up with the weakest character, needless to say. It wouldn't matter how hard I trained, but I could become the strongest for like a minute, and then somebody else would show up and they'd be like, okay, well they came and they're getting like 5,000 extra power levels, a bonus for today. So
I'm not sure what it says about our social hierarchy, but without a doubt, two things were constant in our RPGs growing up. the pen and paper kind. First was that Justin would always be the weakest. Second was that Andrew would always be the strongest.
So I think that brief introduction alone should give you a pretty good sense of, the type of dynamic we have as a group and how much gaming really did influence our friendship. Now, I think the big thing that really kind of was important to us in wanting to approach doing this and what we really want to kind of communicate to you guys is that we do feel like gaming was a pretty fundamental element of us growing as friends, a fundamental element of our development as people, and not to, make it sound overly serious, but we do think there's a lot of value in the experiences we had, and we thought this podcast could not only allow us to touch on, old memories and kind of talk about those types of things, but also allow us to sort of maybe convince younger generation or, new listeners, new gamers to try to engender the same type of relationships amongst themselves. So I don't know. How important do you guys think gaming really was to us growing up, as a group?
I'd say without a doubt it was essential to just the growth of our friendships over time. I think the thing about gaming is that it takes a certain group of friends and it transforms them into a type of team in which people start taking on roles and people start taking on responsibilities. And in our case, I was at actually a pretty young age, and so in addition to the enormous life lessons to be learned, you start to interact with each other differently and more meaningfully.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely. I mean, I think our social hierarchy, as you said, although you're kind of kidding, I think it actually did correspond in a way to where, because I was like always the person in the group who was kind of, I don't know, considered the weakest or the least athletic. I think that also kind of transpired and showed in games. I was always kind of, it didn't matter how much time or effort I put into it. It would always seem like you guys would just kind of show up in like a game and just beat me. I remember Steve would actually, I had bought DBZ Budokai a couple years ago, and we
agreed not to talk about DBZ Budokai publicly.
Well, that may be, but I had been playing the game. I owned the game, and I had been playing it for a couple months. And Steve would just casually show up occasionally, and he would, within a matter of several matches, was already like besting me, and I think that kind of carried.
If by besting you mean beating you into the ground.
Yeah. I guess we could say that.
So now you have a pretty good sense, I think, of what gaming means to us and how important it was to us growing up. I think what's important to touch on a little bit is what we expect the show to be, what we hope the show to be, what the show's going to be for you guys. The only way I can think to describe it, or at least, to give us the flexibility to do what we want to do, is to call it a variety show. I think we want to talk about some specific games. We want to deal with issues in gaming culture at large. I don't feel like we want to be pinned down by trying to focus in on just one thing, but I think we kind of will just want to take on the subject of gaming in the way that we do when we're having normal conversations with each other, and just bring that to the masses and kind of bring that to you guys in the hopes that you'll kind of see maybe yourselves in it. I don't know. Is there anything you guys kind of want to add to that in terms of what else you think we're going to bring to the table over the course of the podcast?
Well, yeah, I can kind of talk about that a little bit. I'll kind of just give a little bit of background about myself and what I'm hoping to bring to the podcast for all the listeners out there. So like we established earlier, I'm 28 years old. I've been playing games with these guys for 20 years now, on and off. And it's been a big part of my life. I started off with my first gaming system, I would say, is Intellivision, actually, which is, for those of you who may not know, although I would hope you would since you're listening to a gaming podcast, was along the lines of Atari. First real system that I actually remember getting was Sega Genesis, and then that was kind of like a big life-changing system for me, because it's kind of like my first love, if you will, and first loves are always the hardest to get over. So I would say for me that was kind of the gaming system that I actually thrived on as games kind of evolved and you got into like PlayStation or GameCube, those types of systems. I kind of fell behind the curve, I feel like, because this group of friends is very intense and very driven into putting a lot of research and time into their games. Me, I'm more of a casual gamer in that I like being able to pick up a game, just play it for a little while, put it down, Whereas these guys, as you'll probably find out, are more, researching strategies and ways to become the best and and better than me, at least.
I mean, I think that's a really good way to put it. If Justin's the casual gamer, then I couldn't possibly be more opposite Justin in every way. It just in terms of the level of intensity with which I approach games, and in the group, I'd say I'd definitely be the guy who would traditionally be considered perhaps like the min-maxer. That is just really just trying to get the edge in like every possible way, strategically and efficiently. And I'm 26. I've been gaming since since I was about 7 or 8. Also started out with Sega, Game Boy, through N64, PlayStation, and I would say one thing I've placed a little more emphasis on than the other guys here. I really became a pretty big PC gamer, still am today, as well as a mobile gamer at times on my iPhone. But I was very drawn to RPGs, and particularly as of late, strategy games. And that really, I would say, just plays very nicely with my own drive to really just to compete and to win. Frankly, I love doing that in every game, and I love just breaking a game down and analyzing it from a very particular way and trying to succeed in precisely that way.
So I think you can get a sense just from Justin and Steve's intro that we're coming to it from a very eclectic perspective. Hopefully all of our own influences and perspectives will kind of meld to give you a better sense of the different sides of gaming. I personally, I've always come at I wouldn't say always, but for a long time, I've come at games from a big narrative standpoint. I'm a big narrative guy. I was a film major in college. Games to me can certainly fulfill a bunch of different purposes, but for the most part, I'm drawn to games where the story really captures me. I'd say JRPGs and probably like hack and slash type games are my favorite genres. Whereas Justin's sort of always been a bit more casual. Steven's been a bit more analytical and strategic. I think I've always been more, it might sound incredibly lame to say an emotional gamer, but if a game doesn't hook me emotionally, there's odds are it won't be.
Emo.
Yeah. I'll be the most emo guy on this podcast. Don't worry about that. But yeah, I've always just really been drawn to games for the same reason I've been drawn to any media or art. It has to be a story that hooks me. It has to be a story I'm invested in. I don't really look at games as a separate they're a separate storytelling device, but I don't look at them on different terms than movies and novels, television. I've always kind of vouched for them being in that same discussion, and I kind of play them as such. So I think I'm going to be coming at things from a bit more of an emotional, a narrative, a sort of theoretical standpoint than these guys, and hopefully my perspective will be a bit different and kind of fill our group out a bit. So I know an important thing kind of that I want to achieve with this podcast, I think I can vouch for you guys also, but let me know, is that I sort of want to get away or try to break down the idea of what a gaming podcast or what a gamer even necessarily has to be. I know in just probably trying to spread this podcast, when people see, listen to our gaming podcast, they're going to have a very clear idea of what they're expecting and who we are as people. And, some of them probably know us and we can be kind of weird, but for the most part, I think gaming in the 21st century and gamer is really a much more wide open and much more varied thing than it used to be. And I kind of hope that through our podcast, you can see that gamers aren't maybe as narrowly defined as you thought they were. You guys feel the same?
I feel like obviously over 20 years, that's a huge stretch of time, and we've had a number of systems and, titles, over that period of time. And I think when we all first started playing games together, we all had this close-knit community where we would walk to each other's houses, sit in each other's basements and play video games all morning or all afternoon. And now, with, the expansion of the internet, and, being able to just put on a headset and play with somebody across the entire world, definitely the social dynamic has definitely changed for one thing. I think by definition too, the cliche gamer is obviously going by the wayside of, sitting in your mom's basement, eating cheese puffs and, run into the video game store and picking up like the latest cartridge from like either Blockbuster or like a video game and tape traders type place.
I mean, I think that cliche of a gamer has in some ways gone by the wayside, but is still today something I personally struggle with, just in the sense that I think many people in our generation growing up just felt this type of pressure or this type of almost accusation that, video games were just like a waste of time. And you feel this big tension between like the amount of enjoyment you get out of it and the way, and the way you love to enjoy it with your friends. But then on the other side, the sense that like you're throwing your life away by playing video games. And I think any for whatever that word's worth, it really has to wrestle with that tension. And in my own life, it's shown up in just being around, just in the business world, perhaps just people talking about what they're going to do, and me mentioning casually like, oh man, I just need to get home and game for a little bit. And, and just meeting with raised eyebrows and just like, how significant has gaming been to you? And have you yourself, Cam, for example, encountered that sense of a challenge posed to something that you really enjoy?
Oh, I mean, I couldn't really agree more wholeheartedly. And I think that was a huge reason why I wanted to kind of take this on, is because gaming is a niche thing. I think it's fine that it's a niche thing. Everyone has their own interests and everyone has their own passions, but I do kind of feel like gaming has gotten a worse rap than a lot of other, interests and passions and hobbies over the years. And I kind of want to communicate through this podcast, and hopefully we will, as the episodes go on, that we kind of have what I think is a pretty middle ground perspective on all this. And I think it's going to serve us well, because I think people from all walks of, the gaming spectrum are going to be able to kind of see eye to eye with us, because, yeah, we've probably thought more about gaming than most people. Yeah, we know a lot about certain games. We've talked a lot about things you might consider weird things to have put so much thought into. But at the same time, we're regular guys with other interests and, lives and, jobs. So I think this podcast is going to be able to kind of really straddle that middle ground between, we're not just a bunch of bros who play COD on the weekends while drinking and like consider gaming to be channel surfing, but we're also not people who have invested every, square inch of our soul into, digital space. We have existences and opinions outside of that. So I think if you're a hardcore gamer, we're going to dive into things in the type of detail that you want. If you're a casual gamer, we're not going to come across as like complete weirdos to you. So I think we're going to appeal to a wide enough demographic that most people should be able to find something, they're interested in listening to us.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I think the perennial issue of interest, perhaps to anyone who's considering gaming, to anyone who has gamed a lot, is just the question of integration, perhaps. How do you integrate gaming into your life? Because certainly there are bad ways to do it. And there are ways in which I think that, in my own case at least, it's genuinely contributed to my own just sense of just fulfillment and purpose here, in the larger sense.
Yeah, I mean, integration is probably an excellent word, because that's something I've been struggling with, recently as it pertains to video games. Starting off, as a kid, being able to dedicate entire days to just playing whatever game it was. If for me, something like ToeJam and Earl, or something that I could just pick up and put down, or EverQuest. And as we've gotten older, I think setting aside that time and life kind of gets in the way. It's kind of hard to. It's been kind of hard for me to find time to integrate games into my life, but I still think it's a big part of who I am. Is something that we've all bonded over the years, and hopefully for many of the listeners out there, they've had a similar bonding experience with a group of friends.
Yeah, I kind of hope, and I think one aspect of this thing that's going to kind of help us through this process is a lot of what we're going to record are things that I think we'd be talking about anyway. This isn't like a couple guys who decided, oh, well, let's start jotting down notes about these abstract gaming things that we'd otherwise have no interest in. I mean, these are conversations that we'd be having sitting around, sitting at the bar, sitting in, watching TV anyway. So what we're really doing is we're bringing our own passion, our own interest to you, and kind of just deciding to put this into podcast form. These aren't things that are completely foreign and completely nonsensical anyway. These are things that we'd be spending time arguing about regardless. We just thought it might be best to do it in recorded format. So maybe we want to spend a couple of minutes just talking about, in more specific terms, what viewers could expect, not only coming up shortly, but in the, distant future, hopefully, if we're still doing it. I think we want to spotlight games a lot, but we also want to challenge ourselves by bringing to you information and podcasts about games we've already played, but then also kind of play games as we're podcasting to kind of maybe give you guys a sense of like how we're feeling about things as we're actually in the moment doing them. We want to bring guests on to have other perspectives. We want to talk about things in more general terms, so we're not boring you with just, game after game after game. I think we're going to have stuff that's going to surprise people on like a week by week basis. I mean, does that sound up your guys' alley?
Oh, absolutely. And I think what listeners will also discover is just an incredible range of games that between the three of us we've really come across. So, for example, from me alone, you can expect to hear what it's like to play through Final Fantasy Tactics without fighting a single random battle, and so having to really conserve every bit of JP you have, or what it's like perhaps to play Elder Scrolls Online for almost 48 hours straight to become the Emperor. I mean, just a lot of just goofy and crazy situations, but a range of games to speak it all in.
Or if you're Justin, how to download all the Game Genie cheats when he was like 12 so he could actually beat games. But
I was actually gonna follow that up by saying, or the struggles of trying to get level 3 in Nectulus Forest in EverQuest as a Dark Elf enchanter who, when he casts a spell, summons like a group of like 20 spiders to attack and kill him immediately.
The only enchanter in EverQuest history who didn't actually know what a mez was.
So as you can tell, I think just from kind of the vibe of this first episode, we want to approach this pretty seriously in terms of our dedication to it, but we want the atmosphere to be pretty light. We want to have fun with it. We want to make sure you guys have fun listening to it. We want to take on things that we think we ourselves would be interested in hearing about, rather than just being some audiobook where you just turn it on and find yourself falling asleep as we remember the good old days of 16-bit demise.
I mean, I think it would be a good idea at this point for us to all kind of go around, just talk about maybe some video games that actually kind of defined us or defined our childhood as we we grew up over the years.
Yeah, we do a couple. Why don't you start then, Buckaroo?
Well, like I said, for me, I'm gonna be bigger into the older systems because that's what I played the most of. But I would say things like General Chaos, Toe Jam and Earl. For Sega, those types of things. Some more like niche titles, not necessarily the bigger franchises per se. PlayStation, definitely, the Final Fantasy series as a whole. Had Breath of Fire, Ape Escape, that kind of thing, and then moving into more current games, Dead Space, Red Dead Redemption, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So my own history game has been pretty diverse, but I'll just touch on some of the more significant ones. Strategy-wise, I've always been a huge fan of the Civilization series, and a Magic the Gathering player, actually, in my own time, which I've recently taken up on the iPad. Loved the range of RPGs, certainly the Final Fantasy series. I also have a great love for the Elder Scrolls series. So back as early as Morrowind, actually, was when I got into the Elder Scrolls series. Today I also do some mobile gaming, and currently I'm playing an RPG called Idle Crusade, which is pretty interesting, but more recently I also played Summoner's War, which is a little bit more popular and mainstream.
Yeah, I think in keeping with sort of the narrative cinematic theme, I've played and been a fan of a lot of the kind of the big games you think of when you think of big budget kind of monumental games, whether it be, you're going to hear a lot of Final Fantasy from us because we're all Final Fantasy fans, but Final Fantasy, the Metal Gear games, the Zelda games, the Devil May Cry series. There's a lot of big popular stuff you kind of expect, but I think I, as well as everyone else here, has also really been a fan of some other off-the-beaten-path titles. So we're going to bring you just about everything you could ever hope, to hear when it comes to a gaming podcast. We're going to talk about popular, well-known stuff. We're going to talk about lesser-known stuff and maybe introduce it to you. We're going to touch on things you'd expect us to. We're going to touch on things that you might wonder why we're talking about, but, give us the benefit of the doubt. We'll deliver for you. And then over time, we hope to sort of allow this thing to evolve pretty naturally to the point where kind of see what we want to do and what people want us to do. So I'm pretty excited about doing more of it. We're just getting kind of started here, just getting kicked off. So anything else you guys want to mention before we kind of talk a little bit about
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to let everybody know to stay tuned. We're going to be doing a lot more coming up, and like Cam said, whether or not you're a limited gamer or all in, spending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week grinding and getting leveled up in WoW or StarCraft or whatever it is that you enjoy, we'll be here for you.
So I hope in our brief introduction, which we're going to dub episode 0 as not to confuse our further episodes, we've given you a pretty good sense of who we are as people, who we are as gamers, how we kind of grew up as gamers together, and what we hope to bring you in the future. We haven't decided exactly on the next couple episodes because we want to leave it a little bit flexible, but I can say that in the next few episodes we will be talking about Final Fantasy VII, which is going to be kind of a real big fundamental element of all of our gaming development. MMOs, I think we wanted to talk about as a genre because we've all played so many. I think we had mentioned maybe Super Smash Brothers. We haven't decided exactly, but I mean, we're talking about a group that eclectic. Check back next couple of weeks. We're going to be updating stuff all over the place, but those are some we know we're going to absolutely do for certain. So if those interest you, check back. But like I said, we could be doing just about anything you can imagine any given week. Where we can be found, our email, thelimitbreakerspod@gmail.com. Hopefully you guys will send us questions, suggestions for episodes, comments, whatever you guys want to say, feel like saying, want to suggest. We want to hear it. We're doing this because we enjoy it, but it'd be really cool to kind of hear from you guys as well. So please email us, thelimitbreakerspod@gmail.com. We can also be found at
our Twitter page, which is twitter.com/limitbreakerpod. Please be sure to send a tweet to @limitbreakerpod and tweet us with any questions, comments, things that you want us to talk about in upcoming episodes, and hopefully we get to address it and give you a shout out in the podcast.
And lastly, of course, our Facebook page, facebook.com/thelimitbreakerspod. Do like us and keep posted.
So you guys are awesome if you hung with us the whole time. We plan to do this weekly. I'm going to say that right now. Check back a week after whenever we post this for our second episode. But once we get the ball rolling, we'll give you a better sense of exactly when episodes are coming. Thank you guys so much. I've had a good time. It's only going to get more fun from here when we get into specific games. So for Cameron,
Justin, thanks for listening.
And Steven.
Take care, guys. The Limit Breakers. Thank you.